Hello and welcome to True Crime Never Sleeps show. As always, I'm your host, Larry Lease, and if you're watching this, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Hope you're having a great Christmas season. And instead of doing our regular Murder Mondays, Cold Case Fridays, this week we're going to do a look back at the top 5 episodes of this year's True Crime Never Sleeps show. So without further ado, let's dive right in to our first episode. Hello, welcome to the True Crime Never Sleeps show. As always, I'm your host, Larry Lease. On today's episode of Fatal Fandoms, we dive into the tragic murder of Rebecca Schaefer. Before we do that, give me your thoughts on this case in the comment section below. And with that, let's dive right into today's episode, shall we? Now we live in a culture that's hungry for fame. Celebrity is everywhere. It represents power, freedom, riches, love, and admiration. A reputation that precedes you wherever you go. Celebrities are often our role models, and their lives represent the most visible peaks of privilege for the minority of us who attain the celebrity that so many dream of. Those lucky individuals eventually learn that for as rare a privilege as it is to be a celebrity, it's also accompanied by some equally rare burdens, sacrifices, and risks. You don't quite realize what a gift anonymity is until you've lost it. And one of the risks of being in the public eye is that of the many millions of radar screens you suddenly find yourself on, somewhere out there, one of those radar screens might be cracked. You may have people out there who want to do you harm. People whose existence you aren't even aware of, thinking about you every waking hour. Maybe losing sleep over you. Building a fantasy around you in which you're their co-star, and the lines between fantasy and reality become blurred. In the summer of 1989, an up-and-coming Hollywood actor named Rebecca Schaefer was blindsided by the worst-case scenario version of this reality. And that's the story I'll be telling you today. From the outset of her life, Rebecca Schaefer seemed destined for success. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, Rebecca was the only child of Dr. Benson Schaefer, a child psychologist, and Dana Schaefer, a writer and university instructor. She was the apple of her parents' eyes. They showered her with love, and she continually made them proud. She was a quick learner, a good student, and popular among her peers. Both her parents were practicing Jews, and she initially wanted to become a rabbi, but in her junior year of high school, she began performing in school plays and modeling and discovered that performance came naturally to her, and her magnetic presence drew people to her. Her very first talent agent in Portland remembered her as fresh-faced and charismatic, with big brown eyes, dimples, and a beautiful smile. As a teenager, Rebecca began earning money modeling for department store catalogs and appearing in local TV commercials. And after appearing as an extra in a made-for-TV movie when she was 16, she spent a summer in New York City working with elite model management. She was so successful that she called her parents and asked for their permission to just stay in New York. They thought it over, and because they trusted Rebecca, they knew she was intelligent and mature. And because she was having the time of her life in New York, doing what she loved, they said, okay. The modeling agents who worked with her saw her as different from many of their other clients. She was serious about her work, despite her young age. She was loyal to her friends, intelligent, and grounded, and everyone who crossed paths with her knew she was headed towards bigger and better things. And they were all right, but Rebecca wanted to ascend to the heights of being a runway fashion model, and she found her modeling career plateauing largely because she wasn't quite tall enough for modeling. Even though she was 5'7", which is above average for women in America, it still wasn't quite tall enough. Rebecca began auditioning for roles on television. Before long, she got cast in a reoccurring role on the daytime soap opera One Life to Live. 2 years later, in 1986, she moved to Japan for a while, and when she failed to book modeling gigs there, she returned to New York and landed a small role in a Woody Allen movie. She continued auditioning and putting her face out there while earning her keep by waiting tables, as many young actors do. And then she auditioned for a lead role in a sitcom. The name of the show was Taking the Town. And after seeing her screen test and hearing her read for the role, the producers had little doubt. Schaefer was a perfect fit for the part of Patty Russell, a key role they had spent months trying to fill, but no one up until now was quite right for her. So Rebecca moved out to Los Angeles, and production for the show began. It's no exaggeration to say this was Rebecca's big break, landing the lead role in a primetime sitcom for CBS, airing in a time slot that almost guaranteed the show high ratings. Before CBS began promoting it, the title of the show was changed from Taking the Town to My Sister Sam. And My Sister Sam premiered on October 6, 1986, and it scored solid ratings right out of the gate. By the end of the first season, My Sister Sam ranked a respectable number 21 on the rating charts and was due to be renewed for a second season. Rebecca Schaefer's life in Hollywood had gotten off to a grand start. Before long, she had a serious boyfriend, an ambitious young UCLA student, an aspiring director named Brad Silberling. She made the cover of TV Guide, and in May 1987, Rebecca appeared on the front cover of 17 magazine, which really cemented for Rebecca that she had, quote, made it. One afternoon, a young man walked up to the Warner Brothers gate in Burbank carrying a bouquet of flowers and a 5-foot teddy bear. The guard at the gate asked him what he wanted, and the man told the guard he was there to see Rebecca Schaefer. He had gifts for her. He said he knew her and she was expecting him. The guard called Rebecca's trailer on set, and her friend Sue Cameron picked up the phone. The guard explained there was a young man at the gate with flowers, and he was there to see Rebecca, who was expecting him. Sue checked with Rebecca, who looked confused. She wasn't expecting any visitors. She told her friend. Sue relayed this information to the guard and asked him to send the man away. The guard hung up the phone and advised the man he was not expected and would not be allowed on the set. The guard knew that this was the same man who had called the set countless times, wanting to speak to and meet Rebecca Schaefer. The guard let the man know he would not be allowed to see Schaefer, and it would be best if he went on his way and didn't return. The man was upset by this and insisted on leaving the teddy bear so they could deliver it to Rebecca. The guard then called Jack Egger, the head of security, who asked him to bring the man to his office, teddy bear and all. Once Jack had the man in his office, he told him it would be best if he forgot about Rebecca and made no further efforts.
All right, folks, quick moment before we dive back in. If you love what we're doing here and you want to help us take True Crime Never Sleeps to that next level, you can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. Every contribution, whether it's the cost of a cup of coffee or something bigger, goes directly into making this show even better. And I don't just mean better audio. Your support helps us upgrade our gear, invest in sharper, more in-depth investigations, and even bring on additional hosts so we can tell these stories with the attention and quality they deserve. We're building something bigger here, and you can be a real part of that. Plus, one of our long-term goals is to take this show on the road. Live recordings from infamous crime scenes and locations across the country, letting you experience these stories in a totally different way. Travel, research, production, food, it all adds up, and that's exactly what your donations make possible. So if you want to help us expand, grow, and keep delivering content that actually keeps you thinking long after the episode ends, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/TCNS and chip in if you can. It genuinely makes a difference. All right, let's get back to the episode.
To contact her, and not to come back to the studio. He then asked him how he'd gotten there. The man told him he'd taken a bus from his hotel on Whitley Street in Hollywood. He asked the man where he was staying and then told him, quote, I don't think you should be boarding a city bus with that 5-foot teddy bear and all those flowers. Let me get you a ride back to Hollywood. Jack then drove the young man back to his hotel, and during the drive, he advised the guy that he should return home to where he's from. You're right, the man said. I'm going to do that. But he wasn't about to give up, and he wasn't done with Rebecca Schaefer. It's safe to say she had a stalker. The young man's name was Robert John Bardo, and the opening act of his life had been the total inverse of Rebecca's. Excuse me. An 18-year-old high school dropout who worked menial jobs and whose life was going nowhere. Bardo had been beset by mental health issues for years. He was from a family with a history of mental health issues, and Bardo had what some described as a tortured childhood. Placed in foster care after being abused by one of his 6 siblings, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and institutionalized at age 15. One of his teachers would describe him as a ticking time bomb. He often threatened neighbors and classmates, and in his freshman year of high school, he dropped out and took a job as a janitor at a local Jack-in-the-Box fast food restaurant. He first became aware of Rebecca Schaefer in the summer of 1986 when he saw a promo on TV for My Sister Sam. His interest was piqued immediately by this young star who, for him, looked outgoing and bubbly, in a word, accessible. He began videotaping her TV appearances, and over the next year, he wrote Rebecca Schaefer several fan letters. Many celebrities in the industry, and this is mainly in the days before social media, would use fan mail or fan services to respond to fan mail. Number one, because there's such a high volume of fan mail and celebrities are often very busy people. But also because it's just safer that way. But Rebecca was new to all of this. And she loved receiving and personally responding to her fan mail. And she had no idea what a mistake she may have been making by sending a personalized reply to Robert John Bardo. In it, she wrote, quote, "Your letter was the nicest, most real letter I've ever received. Please take care." She then drew a heart, signed her name, and included along with her response an autographed 8x10 headshot photo. For the lonely young Bardo, this sent his fragile mind tail-spinning into fantasies of a life with Rebecca. He knew he had to be with her. So in the summer of 1987, he boarded a plane and flew to LA. From the Burbank airport, he took a cab to a hotel with weekly rates, checked into his room, and took a bus to the studio where My Sister Sam was shooting. But when he was unceremoniously turned away at the Warner Brothers gate, with Rebecca mere yards away, just beyond his grasp, he returned to Warner Brothers a month later. This time armed with a knife, just in case things went south. And once again, he was rebuffed by security. This enraged him, but he kept the knife pocketed, maybe because the security guards were armed. Bardo left and returned home, with his fantasies broken and frozen over by darkness. His life up to this point had been a big trash fire that was only growing in intensity. Over the next year, he would be arrested 3 times on charges ranging from domestic battery to disorderly conduct. Meanwhile, My Sister Sam began airing its 2nd season, but CBS pulled a surprise move. They changed My Sister Sam's time slot from its winning Monday night slot to Saturday nights. Nobody was pleased with this, and everyone involved with the production felt that it doomed My Sister Sam, and indeed, it did. The show's ratings took a sudden nosedive, and by the end of October 1987, it had fallen from its peak at number 21 all the way down to number 71 on the ratings chart. CBS weighed their options and put Sister Sam on the chopping block. And while they decided whether to go ahead and cancel it or not, they put the show on hiatus. This resulted in an outcry from its fans. Letters of support began pouring in, and then the Writers Guild of America went on strike in March of 1988. History does tend to rhyme, doesn't it? And that lasted for 4 months. CBS, knew the strike was brewing, so the network executives had cannily allowed My Sister Sam to continue production through the end of 1987, despite putting the broadcast on hold. So when the strike began, CBS had enough episodes in the can that they put the show back on the air in March of 1988. And when I say in the can, I mean it literally in this case, because My Sister Sam, like most sitcoms in the 80s, was shot on actual film stock. So CBS had enough unaired My Sister Sam in the can that they were able to return it to the broadcast during the 1988 WGA strike. And they moved it from its ill-fated Saturday night time slot to Tuesday nights, hoping that it would give the show's ratings the boost it desperately needed. By the end of April, My Sister Sam was once again pulled from the CBS lineup, and this time it wasn't coming back. The following month, the network announced that they had made the decision to just cancel the show, leaving 12 already finished episodes unaired. This was disappointing news for Rebecca Schaeffer, but she was resilient and knew her worth. She was still only starting out, and she knew that bigger and brighter things lay ahead for her, onward and upwards. Meanwhile, one person who was not very resilient was Robert John Bardo. Back home, he was still reeling over what had happened in LA, and he was thinking about Rebecca, a person he had never met, every minute of every hour of every day, seething with pain and anger over that which he could not have. And he couldn't let that go. He wouldn't let it go. He couldn't accept it. He had to figure out a way back into her life so they could have the relationship he knew in his mind they were destined to have. Rebecca Schaeffer wasn't the first public figure Bardo had been obsessed with. When he was in his early teens, he had developed a fixation on Samantha Smith, a child actor who worked on the Disney Channel and became famous for her peace activism. Samantha wrote letters to Soviet leaders asking them why relations between the Soviet Union and the United States remained so tense. She was like the Greta Thunberg of her day. Bardo stalked Samantha Smith, traveling to Maine in an attempt to meet her, but he wasn't successful. And then in August 1985, Samantha was returning from a production shoot with her father when the small commuter plane carrying them slammed into some trees during landing, killing everyone on board. Bardo grieved and then turned his attention to teen pop stars Tiffany and Debbie Gibson, traveling to New York in yet another unsuccessful attempt to meet a star he was fixated on. And then eventually he laid eyes on Rebecca Schaeffer and wouldn't give up the way he had before. In 1989, Rebecca landed a supporting role in an independent film called Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, and on June 30th, the movie opened on one screen in Tucson, Arizona. Among the ticket buyers that weekend was Robert John Bardo. I must point out, this was 1989. We're talking pre-internet movie database and Wikipedia. So a guy like Bardo had to go out of his way to stay on top of what a performer like Rebecca Schaeffer was up to. He had to have been reading a lot of entertainment publications for it to have entered his radar that Rebecca had a small supporting role in this little indie movie that was barely released. So the weekend opened, he went down to the Cineplex Theater and bought a ticket to see Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. He sat and watched the film, disappointed by how few scenes Rebecca was in. He was there to see Rebecca, not Ed Begley Jr. or Wallace Shawn. But then, midway into the film, Rebecca's character had some more screen time, and it was in a scene that would send Bardo over the edge, past the point of no return. That fateful scene was a montage of various characters in bed together, and one of the shots shows Rebecca's character under the covers in bed, sleeping next to a male character, implying that they'd had sex. It wasn't a full-on sex scene, mind you. It was the mere implication that Rebecca's character had sex with this guy that sent Bardo spiraling. Like he couldn't distinguish between her character and the actress playing her. Couldn't tell fiction from reality. Bardo left the theater blinded by rage and thinking pitch black thoughts. For him, Rebecca Schaeffer was, in Bardo's own words, just another Hollywood whore, and for that, he was going to make her pay the ultimate price. Bardo then went to a gun shop in Tucson and tried to purchase a firearm, but the gun shop owners read on Bardo told them that this might not be someone who should have access to a gun. The owner asked him some questions, and Bardo opened up about his mental health issues that, as far as the law went, made Bardo ineligible to purchase a gun. So the owner refused to sell him one, and he actually took a photo of Bardo and posted it on the wall behind the counter so other employees would be on alert. That's how disturbing a presence Bardo was. But Bardo was undeterred. He went home and approached his brother Edward and told him he wanted to buy a gun. Edward asked why he wanted a gun, and Robert explained he just wanted it for target shooting. Knowing the severity of Robert's mental health issues, Edward told him he'd agree to go into the gun shop and buy him a gun under the condition that he only use it for target shooting and only when they were together. Of course, Robert agreed. So Edward went to the gun shop and left with a Ruger GP100, which they then kept stored in a bedroom closet. And while it was not legal for someone with Robert Bardo's mental health history to purchase a firearm, there was no law at the time preventing him from buying ammo. Excuse me. So Bardo went and bought hollow point bullets because Bardo had read that hollow point bullets were deadlier than ordinary bullets. Once fired, they expand inside the victim, causing a large, more potentially lethal wound. He wanted to shoot Rebecca Schaefer, 21-year-old Hollywood actress he'd never met before, and kill her. He had a relationship with her that was one-sided entirely in his own mind. A relationship with Rebecca Schaefer that Rebecca Schaefer was entirely unaware of. Back in LA, her ignorance of Robert John Bardo's existence and the danger that would be headed her way, Rebecca moved into a second-story apartment in West Hollywood, down from the mountain to city level in the thick of urban life. Like most tenants in apartment buildings, Rebecca's last name was on her outside mailbox, which is something her more seasoned friends in the industry advised her against. But Rebecca saw any potential risk associated with this to be a long shot. She had bigger things to concern herself with, like her career. And when she got word from her agent that Francis Ford Coppola, the director of the Godfather movies, wanted to audition her for a part in The Godfather Part 3, this represented the single most exciting thing that had come her way to date. More exciting than that cover of 17 magazine. I mean, it is the Godfather franchise. Hell, I'd be on that movie. More exciting than My Sister Sam. And though she would be competing against other bigger celebrities like Madonna, she was confident in her charm and her abilities. Rebecca projected innocence, vulnerability, and accessibility. Exactly the qualities of the role they were calling for, and exactly the qualities that drew deranged stalker Robert John Bardo into the sticky, inescapable web of fixation on the fresh-faced young actress. At this point, nothing would stop Bardo. Bardo had remembered reading about an incident that had taken place in 1982 with another Hollywood actress named Teresa Saldana. One of her biggest fans was an unstable 46-year-old man from Scotland named Arthur Richard Jackson, who became obsessed with her and decided he had to meet her. He hired a private investigator to track her down, but the best the PI could deliver was the unlisted number of Teresa Saldana's mother. Jackson then called Teresa's mother and posed as a director's assistant and said he wanted to hire Teresa as a last-minute replacement. Jackson said he needed Teresa's residential address so he could send her documents and materials. Her mother gave it to him. With that information, Jackson arrived in Los Angeles, traveled to Teresa's West Hollywood home, and in the middle of the day, waited for her to appear before lunging at her with a 6-inch hunting knife, slamming the knife into Teresa repeatedly. People stood by watching and doing absolutely nothing until a delivery man named Jeff Fenn heard Teresa's screams and rushed from the second story of a nearby apartment building, subduing Jackson long enough for the police to arrive and place him under arrest. Teresa was taken to the hospital with 10 stab wounds and a punctured lung. Luckily, she survived this attack, which took her 4 months to recover from. So Robert Bardo read about this and found it inspiring. A light bulb was lit above his head, and he picked up the phone, hired a private investigator of his own. A private investigator named Anthony Zinkis to find Rebecca Schaefer's home address. Zinkis went to the DMV in LA, where at the time you could pay a small fee like $5 and get anyone's home address. Zinkis then got back to Bardo and gave him Rebecca Schaefer's home address, 120 North Sweetser Avenue, West Hollywood, California. Within days, Bardo was on a Greyhound bus to Los Angeles. His family thought this was crazy, of course, but they didn't intervene because it didn't seem likely he'd get to a Hollywood star or that he would actually harm her. On the night of July 17th, Rebecca and her boyfriend Brad returned to her apartment after seeing a movie. They talked for a while. She was excited to meet with the director of the Godfather movies, and she was expecting delivery of her sides by the next morning. Sides, by the way, are the parts of a script an actor receives to prepare for an audition. Excuse me. The script for Godfather Part 3, like any major Hollywood movie in pre-production, was heavily guarded under lock and key, so actors auditioning would receive only the parts of the script that are relevant to their characters. Someone was expected to show up the following morning with those sides, so Rebecca wanted to get some sleep for her big day. She also had plans to attend a concert that night with her friend Barbara, and so Brad left to go back to his apartment instead of staying over with Rebecca. The next morning, Robert Bardo got off his Greyhound bus and made his way to the area of Sweetser Avenue in West Hollywood. In his hands, he was carrying the autographed picture Rebecca had personally sent him, inside a bulky manila envelope. He went around her neighborhood and began showing people the photo, asking them if they knew the woman in the photo and if they knew where she lived. The people he approached instantly recognized that he seemed odd and out of place. But this was also LA, which is no stranger to drifters and a little bit of weirdos. Bardo walked into the neighborhood looking at the address and finally found 120 North Sweetser. He walked up to the front door and he looked on the mailboxes, saw Rebecca's name, and rang her buzzer. Now, normally, each apartment in this building had an intercom system where the resident could communicate with, whoever was ringing their bell. But unfortunately, Rebecca's was broken. And since she was expecting that delivery of her Godfather Part 3 sides, she went down to the front door and opened it, thinking it may be those. But it wasn't. There stood a strange-looking stranger, a man that she'd never seen before, Bardo, and that moment was shocked that Rebecca Schaefer had actually come to the front door and was standing before him. Even though it had always been his objective to meet her, he couldn't have imagined it would ever be this easy, since up to this point, it had kind of been difficult. But here she was. He was nervous. He began mumbling, tripping over his words as he told her he was her biggest fan. Showed her the autographed photo. Trying to be nice, Rebecca shook his hand and told him it was nice to meet him, but she had to get ready for an interview and she didn't have time to talk. She wished him well and asked him to please not come to her home again. She then closed the door and Bardo stalked away, furious that she had simply dismissed him. As Rebecca went back upstairs, Bardo made his way to a nearby diner and ordered breakfast. He sat and ruminated, thinking about what he was going to do next, and then, after he finished his meal, he went to a payphone and called his sister. "You're going to hear something about me pretty soon," he said ominously. After he hung up, he left the diner, walked back to Rebecca Schaefer's building, and rang the buzzer once again. Rebecca was actually in the middle of a shower when she heard the buzzer, and not wanting to miss the script, Rebecca threw on a bathrobe and ran back downstairs, not imagining that the man from earlier wouldn't have gotten the hint and would be back at her front door. But she opened the door, and there he was again. This time she was irritated, and she hardened her tone. "Look," she said, "I'm really busy today, and you're wasting my time." "There's something I forgot to give you," he said, reaching behind him, pulling the gun from his waistband, whipping it around in front of him, and firing one shot, point-blank range, into Rebecca Schaefer's chest. Rebecca cried out and asked why. She fell to the ground, and Bardo walked away. Rebecca's neighbors, shaken by the deafening blast of the gun, followed by a sobbing, raced out to find Schaefer lying motionless on the ground, bleeding from a chest wound, with her eyes open but empty. Police and medics were called. By the time they arrived, Rebecca Schaefer was rushed to the emergency room. But it was too late to save her. After 30 minutes of intense medical attention, she was pronounced dead at 22 years old. By this point, Bardo was long gone, and no one had any clue yet who he was and who had shot and killed Rebecca Schaefer. An intensive manhunt was launched, with air and ground searches across West Hollywood, as police canvassed the neighborhood and learned about the strange man who'd been seen with a photo of Rebecca, asking if she really lived in the neighborhood. Rebecca's mother, Dana, first got the call. Hearing that her only child had been shot and killed was like a shot to her own heart. Devastated, she called a friend who relayed the message to Benson, Rebecca's father, who was at a psychology workshop, which he then ran from screaming. Benson and Dana Schaefer flew to LA and saw their daughter's lifeless body in the morgue, confirming that this wasn't an error. Rebecca was dead. When reports of her murder hit the evening news, Bardo's family saw it on TV and immediately feared the worst. Edward Bardo ran to the closet to check if the gun he had bought his brother was still there. It wasn't. It was missing. The following morning, Robert John Bardo boarded a Greyhound and returned home to Tucson. Hours later, a call came in to the Tucson police. The caller reported that there was a man standing in the middle of a busy roadway, running in and out of traffic, screaming that he had killed Rebecca Schaefer. Police approached the man, who of course was Robert John Bardo. They noticed he looked dirty and disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days. Officer John Norton frisked Bardo and didn't find a weapon, and then Bardo leaned against his car and began to cry. "What's wrong?" the officer asked. "You'd better arrest me now," Bardo said. The officer asked him why. "Because I shot somebody," Bardo told him. They immediately placed him under arrest, and during that time, they found the autographed picture of Rebecca Schaefer in his shirt pocket. In no time, he openly admitted having killed her. He was charged with first-degree murder and extradited to Los Angeles. Rebecca's funeral took place in her hometown of Portland. It was standing room only at the synagogue. Rebecca's coffin was wheeled in and placed beside Dana, Rebecca's mother, who rested her hand on her daughter's casket and kept it there throughout the service. The woman assigned to prosecute Bardo was a young attorney named Marcia Clark, who you all know as the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial, but obviously that would be years later. Bardo was not denying that he killed Schaefer, but his attorneys mounted a defense that focused on Bardo's mental health, trying to make the case that Bardo's mental illness impaired his capacity to carefully plan and premeditate and diminished his culpability. And among what they were presenting was that it was a U2 song called Exit off their 1987 album, The Joshua Tree, that had driven Bardo to kill. Incidentally, that song is about a psychotic killer, and it contains the line, quote, "His hand in his pocket, his finger on the steel. The pistol weighed heavy, his heart he could feel was beating." Bardo stated that when he heard this song, it felt like he was hearing his destiny being delivered to him. During the trial, they played the song in the courtroom, and Bardo, as he listened to the song, seemed to really come alive, as though he were possessed. He was rocking out in the defendant's chair, mouthing the words, singing along, bopping back and forth. It was quite a sight. Those testifying included the head of security from Warner Brothers, Robert Bardo's parents Philip and June, neighbors who heard the gunshots, and a forensic psychologist, Park Dietz. Park Dietz had actually testified in the trial of John Hinckley Jr., the guy who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan, in order to impress actress Jodie Foster, which we will dive into next week for our season finale. And Dietz had later testified in the Unabomber and Jeffrey Dahmer trials. Dietz testified for the defense, telling the court that Bardo was schizophrenic and not fully accountable for what he had done, but Clark sought to prove premeditation and special circumstances to ensure Bardo was locked up for good. At the trial's conclusion in October 1991, the judge, this was a non-jury trial, declared that Bardo was sane when he murdered Rebecca Schaefer and found him guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Bardo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he's currently serving out his sentence in California. On the way out of the courtroom, Rebecca's boyfriend, Brad, addressed Bardo and told him, quote, "Your cowardice is going to haunt you for the rest of your life." Brad went on to a successful career in Hollywood, directing such movies as Casper and City of Angels. In 2002, he wrote and directed a movie inspired by his dealing with the aftermath of Rebecca's murder and her family's grief. That movie was Moonlight Mile, with Dustin Hoffman and Susan Sarandon as the parents of a murdered woman and the relationship with the dead woman's boyfriend. The cast of My Sister Sam did an anti-gun PSAs, and friends of Rebecca have helped lobby for gun control and more stringent anti-stalking laws. Rebecca's murder led to the criminalization of stalking in the state of California, making it illegal to, quote, follow, harass, and threaten another person. And in 1994, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act was signed into law, preventing the DMV from releasing people's residential addresses. Much like Patrick Sherrill became the poster man-child for going postal, Bardo was the textbook face of the obsessed fan. But stalking of public figures has only gotten worse in the years since. Rebecca Schaefer certainly wasn't the only celebrity killed by a deranged fan. In her murder, there were eerie echoes of not just John Hinckley Jr.'s attempt to assassinate President Reagan, but also John Lennon's murder in 1980. And weirdly, the one tie that binds all three crimes is the book, The Catcher in the Rye. All three men were found to have this book in their possession after gunning down their targets, including Robert Bardo, who was carrying a copy of this book when he shot and killed Schaefer, flinging it onto the roof of a nearby apartment building as he fled the area. But The Catcher in the Rye is blameless. If you love The Catcher in the Rye, it's okay to keep on loving it. Books don't drive people like Bardo to kill. Songs don't drive people like Bardo to kill. That drive is an inner drive from deep psychological damage and unchecked soul rot. People like Rebecca Schaefer are a light in their darkness. And if they can't have total possession of those people, they snuff out their lights. That's the explosive cocktail of an impoverished existence and a warped mind. If you're a public figure, there's always a risk that some person out there, among the 8 billion of us on this planet, some person whose existence you're entirely unaware of, is thinking about you just a little too much. Thinking about you in ways that, if you knew about it, would disturb you to your core. And sometimes those people reach out and don't go away. And sometimes those people kill. Many other celebrities have had stalkers, and the laws on the books are so loose about prosecuting stalkers and protecting victims that celebrities often have to hire private security consultants when they have stalkers who won't leave them alone and feel like they pose a danger. And that is our episode for this week's episode of Fatal Fandom. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments section below. And what do you think about the current situation of the stalking laws? Let me know in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Do you have any experience with stalkers? If not, just give me your story in the comment section if you want to. You don't have to, of course. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. And before we go, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Fastest VPN. Fastest VPN just dropped a 93% off lifetime plan for Black Friday. And yes, lifetime literally means you pay once and you're covered forever. No monthly bill creeping up, no surprise renewal, just done. If you've been putting off getting a VPN, this is the moment to stop procrastinating. And we're talking $35 for your VPN. You're getting military-grade encryption. You can keep hackers, weird Wi-Fi snoops, and shady networks out of your business. You get unlimited bandwidth. So go ahead, stream, download, and browse without hitting a cap. You got ad blocker and malware protection built right in. On top of that, you have servers in over 100 locations. And 24/7 support if anything ever goes sideways. And again, a lifetime subscription for the cost of one dinner out. Seriously, 93% off doesn't happen often, and once Black Friday ends, the deal disappears. So if you want long-term privacy without paying long-term prices, this is the move to make. Hit the link in the description today, grab the deal, and lock in your internet security forever. And with that, thank you so much for watching this episode of Fatal Fandom on the True Crime Never Sleeps show. I'm your host, Larry Lease, and we'll see you next time. And before we go, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Fastest VPN. Fastest VPN just dropped a 93% off lifetime plan for Black Friday. And yes, lifetime literally means you pay once and you're covered forever. No monthly bill creeping up, no surprise renewal, just done. If you've been putting off getting a VPN, this is the moment to stop procrastinating. And we're talking $35 for your VPN. You're getting military-grade encryption. You can keep hackers, weird Wi-Fi snoops, and shady networks out of your business. You get unlimited bandwidth. So go ahead, stream, download, and browse without hitting a cap. You got ad blocker and malware protection built right in. On top of that, you have servers in over 100 locations and 24/7 support if anything ever goes sideways. And again, a lifetime subscription for the cost of one dinner out. Seriously, 93% off doesn't happen often, and once Black Friday ends, the deal disappears. So if you want long-term privacy without paying long-term prices, this is the move to make. Hit the link in the description today, grab the deal, and lock in your internet security forever. And with that, thank you so much for watching this episode of Fatal Fandom on the True Crime Never Sleeps show. I'm your host, Larry Lease, and we'll see you next time.
This is strangers. Sure, you might spend the occasional evening sharing a beer or two over happy hour, but a lot of the time, we don't really know what goes on with our coworkers after hours. What they go home and complain to their partner or roommate about, what they do with their spare time, what plagues them as they lie awake in bed at night. We like to think that we can trust our employer, that they've done their due diligence and hired people that play nice with others. But how can you ever be sure? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2020 alone, there were close to 400 workplace homicides in the U.S., which means someone is out there right now sharing a workspace with a dangerous individual. And like today's victim, they probably have no idea. So to kick off today's case, I want to introduce you to a young woman named Annie Lee. Born on July 3rd, 1985. Annie grew up in a small Northern California town called Placerville in a tight-knit family of first-generation Vietnamese Americans. Raised mostly by her aunt and uncle, Annie and her brother Chris, along with her 3 cousins, all shared a modest ranch-style home nestled in a quiet, wooded neighborhood. But from a young age, Annie was eager to stand out, to make her family proud of her accomplishments. They'd worked so hard to give her the opportunities that she had, she wanted to give a little something back. So in high school, Annie worked hard enough to become a member of the National Honor Society, which eventually turned into valedictorian. But Annie wasn't just wildly intelligent, she was also quite popular, winning superlatives like best of the best and most likely to be the next Einstein in the yearbook. During her graduation speech, the 4'11", 90-pound Annie stood before her classmates with the confidence of a towering CEO. She wore her heart on her sleeve, laying out her hopes and dreams for the future. With a passion for cellular biology, Annie told her classmates that she was planning to become a laboratory pathologist and was prepared to spend the next decade getting her MD. Can you imagine? Like, the last thing I was thinking in school, I wasn't good at school, first of all, but the last thing I was thinking in high school was, what am I going to do? I'm going to be a freaking MD? Like, that's insane. I wouldn't even know that was a career choice. But that's what I'm talking about. We need people like that. The problem was, despite Annie's incredible academic record, she didn't have an easy time receiving the scholarships that she needed to make the future she wanted a reality. It's expensive. 102 applications later, Annie had cobbled together enough money to finally get herself into college. I don't even know how long it would take to fill out 102 applications for scholarships, to be honest. Her first choice was Princeton University because of its unprecedented science program. But when Annie sent through her application in the spring of 2003, she was met with a rejection letter. I also have to mention here, so she gets rejected from Princeton, right? And something funny, and I'm including this because I want you to get a picture of Annie's personality. After getting rejected, she goes and applies to a couple backup colleges, and then she also sends a picture of her butt to the dean of admissions at Princeton. This was just the kind of quirky side of Annie, or I should say, kind of quirky, upbeat character Annie always was. According to a fellow student of hers, she was the kind of girl who would, quote, wear 5-inch heels while doing mouth surgeries, eat fried chicken and not gain a pound, and use smiley faces in her presentations and not lose respect because of it. You'd think that sending a picture of her butt would get her into the school. You know what I'm saying? It'd be the opposite. She should have done it before she submitted her application. I mean, if I'm going to say that, it probably was a picture that looked more like on Grease when they mooned them at the dance. More mooning than it was like a sexy picture, for sure. So Annie knew she had a bright future ahead of her, wherever she ended up. which, at least for undergrad, became the University of Rochester, located in western New York State, right along Lake Ontario. So Annie packed her bags to say goodbye to California and traveled 2,600 miles east to New York State, prepared to brave the harsh East Coast winters while beginning her degree in cell development biology. What Annie maybe didn't expect to find at the University of Rochester was the love of her life. After forming a close friendship with fellow student Jonathan Wadowski, the two slowly fell madly in love with one another. But come 2007, Annie had finished her undergrad degree and was searching for the perfect school to continue her graduate studies. Jonathan had been accepted to Columbia in New York City to pursue a master's in applied physics and mathematics. But Annie had her sights set on a different program. She wanted to go to Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, where she could get her doctorate in pharmacology. The two knew the next several years wouldn't be easy on the relationship, but they also knew that they wanted to stay together. So they agreed to go their separate ways academically, but vowed to stay together by keeping in touch daily and visiting one another whenever their studies allowed, which wasn't that difficult. The trip between their two schools wouldn't be more than 2 hours one way. So in September 2007, Annie begrudgingly said her goodbyes to Jonathan and began her journey on the Ivy League campus. So founded back in 1701, Yale is somewhat of a time capsule in the town of New Haven, with around 260 historic buildings, gorgeous wrought iron gates, and tree-lined paths. The campus is a picturesque, if not distracting, place to study. Today, its enrollment count is about 14,000, which seems small, but it's Yale. But as former Yale president Richard Levin once said, the campus was, quote, large enough to be interesting, yet small enough to be friendly. Which is why Annie Lee felt right at home, nestled comfortably in her new living quarters. And like many Yale students, Annie didn't venture far off campus too much. The neighborhoods surrounding Yale had their fair share of crime, drugs, gangs, the occasional shootings. Although there were many people in the New Haven area who came to the campus to find employment at the university, even today, Yale is New Haven's biggest employer. But, as might be the case with any college town, the locals had their issues with the constantly expanding campus and the wealth and privilege that these students brought to their middle-class town. Things like increased traffic, gentrification, drunken college kids, partying into the night, that kind of stuff. There was sort of an unspoken rift between the university and those that lived in New Haven full-time. One that Annie was seemingly aware of because campus safety was always an issue at the forefront of Annie Lee's mind. In fact, she had written an article for the student magazine offering tips on how to avoid becoming a victim of a dangerous crime. In the article, Annie acknowledged that on-campus thefts were on the rise, some of which included violent confrontations, and it was important to be aware of your surroundings. After including interviews with the Yale Police Department's chief of police, Annie concluded her article with one foreboding statement, and it's read, quote, New Haven is a city, and all cities have their perils. But with a little street smarts, one can avoid becoming another statistics. And unfortunately, Annie would soon learn it just wasn't that simple. Over the next year, Annie buckled down and focused on her studies, as well as maintaining her long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Jonathan. In fact, during one visit in 2008, he got down on one knee and asked Annie if she would spend the rest of her life with him. And she was over the moon, eager to start planning their wedding immediately. The couple set a date and a location. Sunday, September 13th, 2009, in a gazebo overlooking a pond in New York. But Annie didn't let the wedding planning get in the way of her research projects. By her second year, she had already begun working on her dissertation topic, the effects certain proteins have on metabolic diseases such as diabetes or cancer, which meant that Annie spent a lot of her free time in Yale's state-of-the-art medical building at 10 Amistad Street, about a 20-minute walk just outside of campus. Most of her time in that lab was spent monitoring and testing the effects of different medicines on mice and rats. But the way Annie saw it, it was all for a good cause. Her ultimate goal was to find new ways to cure any of these debilitating conditions. So come September 8th, 2009, Annie was less than a week away from walking down the aisle. With all the final details in place, Annie calmed her nerves by distracting herself with her research. That morning, the first chill of fall was already descending upon the campus. The leaves were preparing to change their colors. Annie was packing her books and hopping aboard the campus shuttle for her office at Sterling Hall, just a few blocks down from 10 Amistad. Annie put her books down on her desk and finished a bit of homework. Afterwards, she grabbed her magnetic ID card to go check on the status of her mice, like she'd done several times before. Annie left her purse, wallet, and cell phone in her office and locked the door. She planned to be back in less than an hour or two, and it was around 9 a.m. when video surveillance captured Annie entering the Amistad building, a building with one of the most intense security systems on Yale property. There were more than 70 different cameras focused on the complex. The only way to get in and around the inside of the building was by using one of those magnetic ID cards. This was mainly due to the neighborhood and the fact that the medical research building had been targeted before by animal rights activists looking to free the lab subjects. So after entering the building, Annie's ID card swiped into her Professor Bennett's lab. It's room G13. She put on her white lab coat, checked on the mice in their cages, and began writing up that day's observation report. But around 12:40 p.m., a fire alarm went off at the 10 Amistad building, and hundreds were forced to evacuate, waiting a safe distance outside for the all-clear to go back in, and many presumed Annie was among them. But come 5 p.m., Annie's housemates, who'd been awaiting her return, were starting to wonder about her. Interesting. It wasn't unheard of for Annie to get caught up in the lab and spend several hours longer on her work than initially promised. However, when 7 p.m. rolled around and her roommates began trying her cell phone to no avail, they started to worry. It got even worse when they realized no one had heard from Annie for most of the day, including her fiancé, Jonathan, who she was set to marry in just a week. Once 10 p.m. came around with no sign of Annie, her roommates decided it was time to alert campus police. The roommates mentioned that not only had no one heard from her all day, she'd also missed her late afternoon class, which was highly unlike her. What was even more alarming was the fact that Annie was just a few days away from getting married. Like I said, she wouldn't just up and disappear like that. When campus police hear this, they think, yeah, maybe, it's not completely unheard of for someone to get cold feet. I feel like it's so hard because it's probably just the stories that we do, obviously, because we're a true crime podcast. It seems like every time we do a case like this, the police or campus police say the same thing. It's just the pattern. Oh, they probably ran away. They're probably just decompressing, blah, 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 blah. But I know there's plenty of opposite times where people report it and they go and help. It just, again, you know what I'm saying? Well, I will say in this case, the theory falls to the wayside pretty quickly when the police check on Annie's office over at the Sterling building, because there they find that her cell phone, purse, and wallet are still there. Knowing that Annie was planning to head over to Amistad, they spent the night and into the following day closely examining footage from the outside of the building. So they're like, this was her kind of whereabouts, so we're going to look. Thank goodness there's cameras. Well, come the next day, news of Annie's disappearance was already catching on. While police were combing the footage on Wednesday, Annie's faculty advisor reported that she hadn't shown up for work at the lab that morning. Plus, she failed to notify the 8 other students in her group of her absence, which was the usual protocol. And when Annie missed more classes that afternoon, the whole campus kind of started to whisper. Had Annie run off with someone else? Was she kidnapped? Or was the truth even worse? Hours later that day, after the police had completed combing through footage of the exterior of Amistad, they discovered a grainy shot of Annie. She was entering the building in the same clothes that she left the house in that morning. She went missing carrying some sort of boxy-looking object. Problem was, they never found another image of Annie leaving the building. So was it possible the 4'11 brunette had been lost somewhere in the crowd during that fire drill and never made it back inside? Because if you remember, everyone exited the building at one point, and they couldn't find her exiting. But that was a lot of people leaving. For now, police found it important to zero in on Amistad, since as of now, it was the last place she was seen. So they searched through parking lots, sifted through trash cans and dumpsters, but nothing turned up. By 7:30 p.m. that evening, with still no sign from the 24-year-old Annie, campus police officially declared her a missing person. By Friday afternoon, September 11th, Annie should have been getting a manicure, preparing for her weekend wedding. Instead, the entire town of New Haven was on high alert, searching for the missing bride. A local news outlet offered $10,000 reward for any information pertaining to Annie's case. Jonathan had come up from New York to help assist in the search for his soon-to-be wife, and a full-on manhunt had begun in earnest. And it had to have been planned because what are the chances there's a fire alarm that goes off? There's enough commotion, so she goes, the cameras can't see her, there's that many. Obviously, it had to have been planned. He had to have targeted her, he or she, because there's no way with that many cameras you can get away with this so easily. By Saturday, campus police were joined by Connecticut State Police, combing every inch of 10 Amistad for signs of the missing Annie. Every door, locker, bathroom, and lab were scanned when one small detail caught an investigator's eye. A ceiling tile that looked askew, almost as if it had been tampered with. When one detective removed the file and reached into the space above, they found a white sock with what appeared to be bloodstains in a single rubber glove. After bagging and tagging the items as evidence, police uncovered even more disturbing signs that they might be honing in on Annie's fate, including a pair of work boots in the locker room that appeared to have bloodstains and were missing a shoelace. They also discovered a pair of scrubs with blood on the shirt pocket. In one room, they found what appeared to be aspirated bloodstains on a wall. And in Annie's lab, another sign of blood spatter that someone had tried to clean up. But here's the thing. This is a lab, right? And there's a lot of animal testing going on. So detectives have to ask themselves, is this blood they're finding even human? Well, that's what DNA testing is for. But unfortunately, that's a bit of a waiting game. So come Sunday, September 13th, Annie should have been slipping into her wedding dress and putting the final touches on her vows. Her family should have been preparing to walk her down the aisle as she and Jonathan danced the afternoon away. Instead, police were back in the halls of Amistad, this time with a canine unit, to search for any new clues about the missing bride's whereabouts. And unfortunately that day, they found the biggest clue of them all. At around 4:30 p.m., officers entered a locker room on the lower level of the facility and were met with a disturbing odor. Now, the seasoned detectives knew this just wasn't some old socks and gym shorts. They were definitely smelling a decomposing body. So one of the dogs followed the scent to a toilet and began barking towards the wall behind it. There was a panel about the size of a computer screen, which detectives removed to find an 8-inch space used to hide the piping. Only on that piping and insulation was a bunch of bloodstains. And how does this person know all these crevices and spaces? And as they moved in deeper, they found the source, the dead body of a young woman, still wearing surgical gloves with a stained lab coat and one white sock. Her body had been so contorted, so mangled to fit into this tiny space, that she was hardly recognized. But there was no denying this was the missing Annie Lease. After Annie's body was analyzed by the state medical examiner, they found that her cause of death was traumatic asphyxiation by neck compression. So in other words, Annie had likely been choked to death. They also discovered that her jaw and her collarbone had been broken, which they believed happened before Annie had died. Her bra had been pushed up and her underwear was around her ankles, and it appears as if her attacker had left his DNA behind, which meant they had a pretty good chance of figuring out who killed Annie, especially thanks to the location where Annie was discovered, because remember, the Amistad building requires a badge to access each room. So not only was it likely the person had a badge and worked inside the building, maybe another student, professor, even a janitor, it was also likely that they had the keycard system recorded when they entered each room. But here's the thing. Police didn't seal off Amistad until after they found Annie's body, so people were moving in and out of the building before this. So for 6 full days while she was missing, people were coming and going, literally contaminating a crime scene. Although, to be fair, police claimed that they weren't aware that they were dealing with a homicide at the time. Excuse me. It was just a missing persons case. The other complication was, while the security system outside of Amistad was seemingly very tight, there was no surveillance cameras inside the building. You know, no one learns. No one ever learns. I mean, this case was back in 2009. I mean, we're in an age where there's a lot of cameras, but it's also not 2023 where there are cameras everywhere. But it does seem odd that they have so many cameras outside the building and nothing inside. Plus, most of the rooms were soundproof, which meant anyone screaming for help probably wouldn't have been heard. But there was one witness who came forward on September 9th, 4 days after Annie was found, to say he saw something that might be useful to the investigation. So we're kind of jumping back in time a little bit. So let's go back to that Wednesday morning before police found Annie's body. That day, they're still combing every inch of Amistad looking for evidence when one of the lab techs approaches Officer Jennifer Garcia with the Yale Police Department. He says he has some information about Annie the day before, the last day she was seen. He saw Annie leaving the building at around 12:30 p.m., right before the fire alarm went off. She was carrying a notebook and 2 bags of mouse food, but he didn't speak to her or ask her where she was going. So Detective Garcia takes note of this, and she figures at least now they have a window of time frame where they can recheck those cameras, maybe see if they spot Annie leaving. Now, the following day, Garcia returns to homicide with Officer Sabrina Wood and a team of others. And this time, something even more alarming is brought to their attention. That day, a different coworker of Annie's goes up to Wood to say, "Hey, there's something that I think you need to check out." She leads Wood over to a box of wipes on a steel pushcart and says, "Doesn't that look like blood to you?" And it absolutely does. So Wood pages the other members of her team to come take samples. But as she waits for them to arrive, the lab tech comes over and starts chatting them up. Meanwhile, he's leaning on the steel cart, trying to move that box of wipes out of their line of sight. And then, strangely, he starts mopping the area around the cart. Now, I have no idea why this tech was even allowed in a potential crime scene while they were investigating. The whole thing just reads very strange to me and very unprofessional. Because I'm just screaming while researching, like, stop him, what the hell is going on? But on the other hand, it ends up leading them to their first real suspect once they find her body. Right? Because, surprise, surprise, the tech is the same one who told Garcia the day before that he saw Annie leaving the building for the fire alarm. Big, big red flags. His name was Raymond Clark. Raymond was a 24-year-old, handsome former athlete, star pitcher and quarterback for his high school teams. The kind of guy people describe as a bit shy but also extremely personable with a great sense of humor. Despite graduating from high school with honors, Raymond decided he wasn't interested in pursuing a college degree. He wanted to stay in town, be close to his family, and get a job nearby. In fact, he figured maybe he could get some work at one of Yale's medical labs, where his sister and brother-in-law were already employed. After all, the tech jobs paid fairly well, if you could stomach much of that work. So most of Raymond's day was spent scraping dirty animal cages, lifting heavy bags of food and bedding, and euthanizing the animals when asked. Lab techs like Raymond bore a lot of the responsibility of watching over the subjects, making sure everything was ethically up to code, and oftentimes if something went wrong, they were also the ones that the professors and students blamed. Because of this, there was somewhat of a divide between the scientists and the techs, much like the divide I explained before between the students and the locals.
Yes, sir.
So when it came to Raymond Clark, most of the students and professors working in Amistad said he just kept his head down, that he liked working at the lab because he not only got to work with his sister and brother-in-law, but also his new fiancée. The couple had gotten their own apartment and a dog, with plans to tie the knot in December of 2011. So where's the motive to kill someone? Well, there were others who said that underneath that people-pleasing jokester, there was another side of Raymond Clark. Apparently, he was quite a stickler for the rules, a control freak who would berate you if you didn't do something like wear shoe covers in the lab. Even Raymond's high school girlfriend had some choice words about her ex. She said he became extremely controlling as their relationship went on, telling her what to wear, who she could socialize with, and on more than one occasion, he got physical with her during an altercation. When she tried to break up with Raymond, she received menacing threats in her locker room and eventually filed a police report for both stalking and sexual assault, but she never followed through on pressing charges. Even Raymond's new neighbors said they have a few uncomfortable and threatening confrontations with the 24-year-old lab tech. So knowing all this, police start to zero in on Raymond Clark, and here's what they unravel. On September 8th, the day Annie disappeared, Raymond's key card swiped into Professor Bennett's lab, room G13, at 5 different times. Now, if you remember this is the same day, same room where Annie's key card swiped. Usually he only went in there once a day, but on this day, he goes in 5 times. He also swiped in several times after working hours, which was uncharacteristic of him, including a few times in the locker room where Annie's body was later found. But the last time Annie had used her key card was around 10:11 a.m. that morning. It was to enter G13, and after that, her key card was never used again. Raymond was brought in for questioning shortly after, trying to cover up the blood spatter in that room, right around September 10th, so a few days before more evidence in Annie's body were found. But things just got even worse for him when he sat across from the police. For starters, they realized he had these deep scratches all over his face, which he claimed, and we've heard this before, was actually from his cat. So Raymond Clark was not making things easy on himself. Then Saturday, September 12th rolled around, and police found those bloody work boots and blue hospital scrubs. When police analyzed the tape taken from the morning of the 8th, Raymond was pictured entering the building in scrubs just like them. And when he was seen leaving later, Raymond was in a completely different outfit. So it's all caught on camera, basically, and all the keycard information as well. It's also funny because if he didn't say anything to police the first time, I believe that they would have eventually solved it, but it would have been a lot harder. There might not have been as many details available, so it's kind of interesting that he tried to cover himself, and that's what ended up screwing him. Yeah, but it wasn't until after they found Annie's body on the 13th that police could finally get a warrant for his arrest. So you in the audience didn't really know that they kind of already had the suspect by the time they found her body, particularly after they confirmed the DNA found on Annie's body did in fact belong to Raymond Clark. So on September 17th, they moved in on Raymond, arresting him at a Super 8 motel. Knowing there was no turning back, he walked away peacefully in handcuffs. But even with Raymond behind bars, now officially charged with the murder, there were still so many lingering questions. Like what happened between the two of them that led to Annie's death, and what caused Raymond Clark to commit such a twisted crime. So let's go back once more to September 8th, 2009, the last day Annie was seen alive. That morning, she supposedly received a text message from Raymond asking her to come in early. He wanted to discuss how Annie kept her workspace, or more specifically, the cleanliness of her mice cages. Apparently, the two had discussions about it before, and some thought Raymond might have been at his wits' end with her. It's believed that once Annie entered G13, Raymond came in and confronted her about the issue. This would have been a little after 10 a.m. During that point, things must have escalated. Raymond likely got violent with Annie, maybe shoving her or knocking her unconscious, which would explain some of the blood spatter on the walls of that room. Trying to cover up the crime, whether intentional or accidental, Raymond likely placed Annie in a metal cart, much like the one he was trying to conceal around detectives. He then moved her body to a more discreet location, and in order to do so, he pulled the fire alarm to get everyone out of the building first. As people were filing out of the building, he seemingly moved Annie to the next room, where he might have realized that Annie was still conscious. That's when he began choking her, which can explain the aspirated blood police found on the wall of a different room. After that, Raymond went around the building with Annie covered in the pushcart, looking for the perfect place to hide her body. He eventually came to the locker room, and that's where he found the perfect spot to stuff the 4'11", 90-pound Annie into the wall. So after this, he found the time to file out of the building with the last stragglers in order to secure himself an alibi. So he hides the body and then immediately bolts out, trying to act like he also left. At least this is the theory that prosecutors laid out during Raymond Clark's trial. But there was still one outstanding detail. What motivated Raymond to commit this crime? Was he really just that annoyed by Annie's mess that would cause him to kill her? Well, according to a workplace violence prevention specialist named Hector Alvarez, workplace-related anger does have the potential to be the sole motivator here. He claims that some people will quietly, to quote, allow their emotions to escalate until they reach a breaking point. But a psychiatrist named Dr. Michael Wellner says that the most common cause of workplace violence is usually triggered by romantic rejection, which would make sense considering that Raymond's DNA was found on Annie's body. Perhaps with Annie's wedding getting closer, he felt he'd be losing her forever, and if he couldn't have her, nobody could. But he also had a fiancée. Others say that Annie's race could have played a role. Those who knew Raymond back in high school said that, as a white man, they found it unusual he chose to be a part of the Asian Awareness Club, which aimed to celebrate the variety of Asian cultures among students, which I find that's actually a little interesting. Which is why some wondered if Annie might have checked some sort of sexual preference for Raymond, leading to a deadly obsession. Regardless of what was going on in Raymond's head, he stood before a court in January of 2010 and pleaded not guilty. But in March 2011, he changed that plea to guilty to reduce his sentence. He was also found guilty of attempted sexual assault. Raymond Clark will be serving 44 years in prison, where he will remain until 2053. But what was really going on in Raymond's head before he woke up the morning of September 8th might forever be a mystery. And that is the case of Annie Lee. She had such a bright future ahead of her as well. Like, the week before her wedding, that's just a horrible time for all this to go down. Well, that is our case for this Murder Monday. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the bell notification button to be notified of future videos. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. You'd think being a prison guard, especially in a maximum security facility, would be relatively safe. Sure, you're surrounded by violent criminals every day, but they're prisoners. Their movements are controlled. They're under constant watch. The guards have security measures in place. But the reality is, working as a prison guard is just as dangerous as any other high-risk job, maybe even more. Prison riots happen, inmates take advantage of opportunities, and sometimes crimes unfold behind bars that are just as brutal as anything happening on the outside. Today's case takes us into that world. This is the story of Donna Payant, the first female correctional officer in U.S. history to be murdered while on duty. Clinton County, New York, the kind of place where working in the prison system is almost inevitable. The area is home to Clinton Correctional Facility. For generations, families have made their living as prison guards. Donna Payant was no exception. She came from a family of correctional officers. Her father, her uncle, her cousins, they were all in the field. When she got older, she married a prison guard, and when it came time for her to work, she followed the same path. Her husband, Leo, hated the idea. He knew how dangerous the job was. He saw it every day, and he begged her to consider doing literally anything else. But Donna was determined. I have to work, she told him. Why should I work for $7,000 or $8,000 a year when I can double that? So reluctantly, Leo gave in. But secretly, he was hoping she wouldn't pass the exams. When she did it, he hoped she wouldn't make it through training. And at first, it seemed like she would. Just 6 days into the program, Donna walked out. Late one night, while she was asleep in her dorm at the training academy, a male supervisor entered her room, uninvited. He stood there silently for a few minutes. Then he walked out. This was the breaking point. The instructors had already been using obscene language and treating the trainees like they were in a military boot camp. But having a staff member enter her room at night was enough for Donna to quit and file a lawsuit. Eventually, the department apologized, and Donna dropped the suit. He returned to training a few months later. By then, the 6-week program had been cut down just 3 weeks due to budget issues. When she graduated, she was not assigned to Clinton Correctional Facility where her husband worked. Instead, she was sent 5 hours away to Greenhaven Correctional Facility, one of the most dangerous prisons in the country. Within 3 weeks, she was dead. Greenhaven was home to over 1,800 inmates, including more than 500 convicted murderers. It was overcrowded, violent, and about as high risk as a prison could get. Even more challenging for Donna was the fact that it was 5 hours from home. Every week, she was forced to live away from her husband and 3 kids. She rented temporary housing near the prison and only got to see her family on weekends. It's hard not to think that this assignment wasn't punitive in some way. Was the correctional department sending her a message? Was this their way of retaliating for the lawsuit she had filed during training? Maybe. But Donna wasn't the type to back down. She wanted to be a guard. She chose this life. And she assumed that, after a short time at Greenhaven, she'd be transferred to Clinton and be back home with her family. She never got that chance. Friday, May 15th, 1981, started out like any other workday for Donna Payant. She arrived at Greenhaven Correctional Facility, checked in through the front gate, punched her time card, headed to the lineup room for her daily assignment. At this point, she had only been working there for 3 weeks. That day, Sergeant Lee Stowe assigned her to the yard, a post she had worked before. Her job was simple: supervise inmates from cell blocks A and B alongside another officer until the yard closed at 4 p.m. After getting her assignment, Donna walked to the arsenal to pick up her portable alarm, basically a panic button she could carry in case of emergencies. She then made her way through a long corridor with windows overlooking the yard, where inmates were lifting weights, jogging, and walking laps. Before she stepped outside, another female guard stopped her, saying, "There's a guy on the other end asking to speak with you." She handed Donna a phone. Donna put the receiver to her ear, covered her other ear to block out noise, and listened. When the call ended, she turned to the nearest officer, handed over her portable alarm and keys, and said, annoyed, "I'll be back in a few minutes." Then she walked off. And that was the last time anyone saw her. Hours passed. At evening roll call, Donna still hadn't checked in. The officer stationed in the yard reported that she had never shown up for her post that afternoon. This was when people finally started to realize something was wrong. A lockdown was ordered. All 1,800 inmates were locked in their cells while guards searched the prison top to bottom. They checked individual cells, offices, storage closets, every possible hiding place. But Donna was nowhere. 7 p.m., Captain Francis DeFrancesco, head of the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, got a call at home. One of the female guards at Greenhaven is missing. The captain immediately authorized the use of search dogs. A team of bloodhounds were brought into the prison and led through the facility. They followed Donna's scent to the dumping area, and that's where the trail ended. There was no sign of her until the next morning. The following day, a bulldozer was moving trash around the local dump, including garbage from Greenhaven. That's when workers noticed something. A black plastic garbage bag had broken open, spilling out a mangled human body. Authorities were called immediately, and soon the body was identified. It was Donna Payant. She had just become the first female correctional officer in U.S. history to be murdered on duty. Right away, investigators had questions. How does a prison guard inside a maximum security facility get attacked, murdered, and disposed of without anyone noticing? How does her body get placed in a 55-gallon prison trash bin, dumped into a garbage truck, taken to a landfill, compacted, and flattened by a bulldozer without anyone realizing what happened? It didn't make sense. And it only got worse. Donna's body had been brutalized. The medical examiner determined that she had been bound, raped, strangled to death. She was still tied up when they found her. And there was something else. She had bite marks, multiple ones across her body. This was not a simple cover-up or an act of revenge. Whoever did this had enjoyed it. This was about violence, about control, about power. And investigators now had 1,800 potential suspects. The investigation was going to be a nightmare to solve. For starters, many of the inmates refused to talk, because in prison, being a snitch can get you killed. Even though all 1,800 inmates had been locked in their cells after Donna went missing, there was no record of where most of them had been before the lockdown. Plus, that afternoon, there had been a revival meeting in the gym, which had thrown off the usual prison schedule. At the same time, a group of new hires was being trained. To make things even more confusing, some of these new guards looked like Donna. So at first, investigators couldn't tell who had actually seen Donna that day and who had mistaken her for someone else. But eventually they confirmed the last time Donna was seen was right after that mysterious phone call. And here's the problem. The guard who answered the phone never asked the caller's name. He had no idea who Donna had been talking to. Donna herself made a critical mistake. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just walked away and disappeared. But right away, investigators had to consider, could this have been another guard? Greenhaven was an overcrowded high-security prison. Privacy was nearly impossible. For someone to commit a crime like this, they would need access, seclusion, the ability to move freely. That sounded a lot more like a prison guard than an inmate. And that's where investigators started. It didn't take long to uncover that some of Greenhaven's guards were involved in illegal activity. Just 2 weeks before Donna's murder, a report had surfaced, exposing a quid pro quo system between officers and inmates. Some guards were smuggling in drugs, others were providing sex workers in exchange for cash and favors. It had been going on for years, and then women started working at Greenhaven. For the first time, female officers were inside the facility. And a lot of them weren't interested in protecting a corrupt system. Donna, in particular, had a reputation for being by the book. The other guards, they hated her for it. She already filed a lawsuit once against the department. They saw her as a snitch, a threat, someone who could ruin everything. At the time of Donna's murder, she was last seen walking into the hospital corridor. The hallway led to the offices of Catholic chaplain Reverend Edward Donovan. One of the other people with access to those offices, the chaplain's assistant, an inmate named Lemuel Smith. And this is where the case takes a disturbing turn. Smith was not just another inmate. He was a convicted serial killer. He had already confessed to 5 murders. When forensic investigators analyzed the bite marks found on Donna's body, they realized something horrifying. The marks matched another victim from 4 years earlier. That victim had also been raped, strangled, mutilated, and bit And the man responsible for that crime? Smith. He wasn't just another violent inmate. By the time he arrived at Greenhaven, he was already a convicted serial killer, serving life for multiple murders. But what made his situation even more alarming was that he wasn't just another prisoner stuck in his cell all day. He had privileges, he had access, he had freedom that most inmates don't. That's because he had been appointed the chaplain's assistant. This position allowed him to move freely around the prison, enter and exit restricted areas, have access to private offices, and use the private telephones, or the prison telephones, excuse me. That last part was huge. Remember, Donna was last seen answering a mysterious phone call before she disappeared. Investigators now had reason to believe that call came from inside the chaplain's office. And who had access to the phones there? Smith. As investigators pieced things together, forensic experts analyzed the bite marks found on Donna's body. And what they discovered was chilling. One of the experts, forensic odontologist Lowell Levin, had seen these bite marks before. In fact, he had just used them in a lecture a few days earlier. The case? A murder from 4 years earlier. The victim, Marley Wilson. Like we mentioned, just like Donna, she'd been raped, strangled, and bitten. And the man responsible for that crime was Smith. This wasn't just a match. This was his signature. And there was one more key detail. Whoever had bitten Donna was missing a lower incisor. Smith, he was missing that exact same tooth. At this point, investigators were convinced they had their suspect. And when they searched the chaplain's offices, it became even clearer. Investigators combed through the chaplain's office, searching for anything that connected Smith to Donna's murder. Immediately, they noticed something suspicious. The floors had been mopped, but not well. Whoever cleaned up had done it in a hurry, using dirty water as if they were rushing to cover something up. Then, in a closet, they found several strands of blonde hair, consistent in color and length with Donna's hair. At the same time, investigators learned something interesting from Donna's husband, Leo. Before her murder, Donna had been planning to buy a handmade jewelry box from an inmate. It was supposed to be piano-shaped, specific design that only a few inmates were skilled enough to make. And guess what Lemuel Smith did in his spare time? He made piano-shaped jewelry boxes. This suggests that Donna may have been lured into the chaplain's office under false pretenses. Maybe she thought she was just picking up the jewelry box. Or maybe she sensed something was off and confronted Smith about the improper phone call. Either way, she walked into that office and never walked out. 3 weeks after Donna's murder, Smith was formally charged. The evidence against him was stacking up fast. The bite mark analysis matched his unique dental pattern. He had access to the chaplain's office where Donna was last seen. The chaplain was away on military leave, meaning Smith had the offices all to himself. And he had a history of violent attacks, including rape, strangulation, and mutilation. Investigators believed Smith had called Donna to the chaplain's office, possibly using the jewelry box as bait. Once she was inside, he attacked her, raped her, and strangled her and mutilated her body. But what set this case apart was his refusal to confess. Smith had admitted to multiple murders in the past, but this time, he denied everything. Smith's defense team fought hard to discredit the bite mark evidence. His lawyers argued that Donna's body had been put through a trash compactor, which could have distorted wounds and made them look like bite marks. They also pointed out that some forensic experts believed that bite mark analysis wasn't reliable, something that would become a much bigger debate in later years. But despite their efforts, the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. So on April 21st, 1983, Lemuel Smith was found guilty of Donna Payan's murder. Because New York law at the time mandated the death penalty for inmates already serving life who killed again while incarcerated, he was sentenced to death. But here's where things get complicated. His death sentence was overturned on an appeal a year later. Instead of execution, he was placed in solitary confinement for the next 20 years. Here's the part that still haunts people. Smith has never admitted to killing Donna, even though the evidence is overwhelming. Even though his past crimes match the details of this one exactly. He refuses to confess, and that has led to some serious doubts about the case. So did he really do it? Donna's sister Judy doesn't believe Smith killed her. She believes that Donna was murdered by a prison guard and that Smith was framed as a cover-up. Her theory? Donna found out about the corruption inside Greenhaven, the drugs, the smuggling, the illegal favors being between guards and inmates, and that she was silenced before she could expose it. It sounds like a wild conspiracy, but at the time, it's hard to ignore the fact that Smith confessed to every other murder he committed. Why would he suddenly refuse to admit to this one? And if the bite mark evidence was really as unreliable as his defense team claimed, would the real killer still be out there? Today, Smith is 81 years old and serving life without parole at the Wynn Correctional Facility in New York. He has never been released, and he has never admitted guilt. Donna Payant remains the only female correctional officer in U.S. history to be murdered in the line of duty. This case is frustrating because on one hand, everything about Donna's murder fits Smith's MO perfectly. But on the other hand, why wouldn't he confess? Is it possible he wasn't the only one involved? Could a corrupt officer have set her up and dumped her body in the chaplain's office for Smith to take the fall? And if that's true, was justice ever really served? Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments section below. What do you think happened? Who do you think actually murdered her? Let me know. Of course, give us the thumbs up if you like a video. Hit that subscribe button down below. The bell notification button to be notified of future videos. And of course, if you want to support the channel in a financial way, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. Everything you give goes right back into the channel, so we can upgrade our equipment, bring in new hosts, be able to pay them, and of course, take this show on the road. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you in our next video. In a new season, this season we're diving into global crimes, infamous crimes from around the world. And of course, starting off, we dive into the world of narco subs. So first, I gotta ask you, what is the most valuable substance in the world? I mean, gold might be a good guess. An ounce of the stuff will cost you over $1,900. You pick up silver, not so much, easily $23 an ounce. The stuff goes for about as much as a really nice shot of vodka. Platinum is a decent guess at about $930 an ounce. But if you were to guess rhodium, we'd probably guess you know what's up. That'll fetch you about $5,000 an ounce if you get the rhodium on a good day. But if you don't happen to have pure rhodium on you, and that $1,900 for an ounce of gold still sounds a bit underwhelming, we've still got one more option for you to try. And that would be cocaine. Based largely on legally gathered data, we found that an ounce of the stuff on the streets of London could cost you over 2,400 pounds. Now, we should probably be very, very clear at the outset of this episode, given where it's going. Please don't try and sell cocaine or any other drugs for that matter. But if you were to, you'd be coming into possession of a very expensive substance that your local government probably doesn't want you to have. And that begs one key question. How much will you pay in order to keep it hidden? The answer apparently is a lot. And if you need proof, look no further than the narco submarine. Produced en masse by drug cartels around the world and ultimately capable of operating either partly or fully under the water. The narco sub is the criminal underworld's best method for getting tons upon tons of the drug across the sea. They're no small undertaking to build. Even a cheap sub will run the cartel between $1 to $2 million. But all that money is chump change when a single submarine can carry up to $100 million worth of product on board. In order to understand the narco sub, we first have to understand the world for which the concept was designed. That should already be clear from the $100 million a cartel can make by getting just one submarine to its target. Drugs are an incredibly lucrative business. According to Global Financial Integrity, the global drug trade is valued upwards of $650 million annually, meaning that it commands more wealth than over 170 of the world's nations. All right, quick pause, everyone. Let's talk privacy online. You know, I'm all about diving deep into true crime and controversial topics, so keeping my data safe is a priority. And that's why I use NordVPN. And honestly, you should too. NordVPN encrypts your online data, hides your IP address, and lets you safely browse the web, even on sketchy public Wi-Fi. Plus, it lets you access geo-block content from anywhere, perfect for binge-watching true crime documentaries from around the world. And right now, they're offering up to 72% off their plans. Yep, 72%. That's a crazy good deal for something that keeps your digital life secure and unrestricted. So click the link in the description to get this massive discount and secure your internet life today. NordVPN, online security simplified. But because the major cities of the world where drugs are sold in high volumes typically aren't the same places their product are manufactured, anybody looking to sell their drugs first has to be able to smuggle them in. In the 1980s, sea smuggling was done mostly via so-called go-fast boats, narrow, powerful craft designed to go as fast as possible in order to outrun law enforcement attempts to intercept them. Go-fast boats, also called cigarette boats, have been around for a long time. And in the first few decades they were used, law enforcement and coastal patrol organizations would generally have to either chase them on their own go-fast boats or try to intercept them using a combination of helicopters and larger, slower ships. But as radar, sonar, and infrared technology have gotten better and better, these go-fast boats have become less and less useful, especially because they are not equipped with the same advanced technology as the people trying to catch them. But for a problem like radar, the solution in principle isn't actually so hard to cobble together. Just put the drug boats underwater, and radar isn't going to pick them up. Early attempts to solve this problem came by way of towed submarines, like the one found off the coast of Boca Raton, Florida in 1988. In this incident, an unmanned 21-ton submarine had been towed behind a slow surface vessel and equipped with a remote control so that it could be submerged if anyone came sniffing. Sealed from the outside, it wasn't meant to be piloted and had no navigational systems. Instead, the general idea seemed to be submerge it in times of crisis and hope that nobody from the DEA or Coast Guard noticed anything under the surface of the water. At the time, U.S. law enforcement was surprised by the craft, and since it was empty, aside from a few $1,000s worth of ballast, there was no direct confirmation that it had been used for smuggling. Funnily enough, the salvager who found it was eventually allowed to keep it after nobody came looking for their narco sub. The discovery set off waves of speculation that went basically unfounded for decades, to the point where the idea of a narco submarine began to be regarded as a sort of black market Bigfoot in some circles. The general expectation was that narco subs were like the vessel found off Boca Raton, towed behind a ship and able to dive down to avoid detection if necessary. While others begin to wonder if independently navigating submarines might actually be possible for drug cartels to make, in 1995 an ex-Soviet fixer was arrested after trying to broker the sale of a retired Soviet submarine to a Mexican drug cartel. And a few years later, in 2000, Colombian police raided a warehouse in a suburb outside the capital city of Bogota and found a half-built submarine that, if completed, could have carried up to 200 tons of cocaine. With time, more and more of the subs started popping up, and eventually U.S. authorities believed they had been able to interdict over 10% of the subs in transit. Definitely not a high efficacy rate, but a good indication that a whole lot of subs were down below the waterline. Narco subs really broke out into the American public consciousness in November of 2006, when a Coast Guard ship 100 miles off the coast of Costa Rica sighted something they couldn't explain. 3 snorkels popping out of the water where no submarines were supposed to be. Naturally, the Coast Guard did what the Coast Guard does. They got closer to check the situation out. When they did, the air pipes ended up being attached to an entire 49-foot-long homemade submarine. Its passengers included 4 smugglers, 1 AK-47, and 3 tons of cocaine with a street value of well past $50 million. It wasn't the first submarine caught that year. Several had already been picked up in 2006 and more in the years prior. But this one was tied to reports from earlier in 2006 when 2 men from South Asia had been identified as having provided plans to Colombian drug traffickers on how to make their submarines on their own. The next subs that got picked up were bigger, semi-submersibles made from fiberglass with cooled exhaust ports that reduced their infrared signature. But as the cartels got better at building them and better at building them in higher numbers, the world also got better at catching them. By 2009, the Colombian Navy had discovered 33, while the U.S. observed as many as 60, estimating that they moved at least a ton of cocaine every single day. In the early 2010s, narco subs began to be more and more prominently associated with FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and collaboration with Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Then, by 2014, American analysts had begun to work out a classification system to understand the kind of narco subs that they were seeing. In a brief prepared by two men, the crafts were broken up into three categories. 1. Low-profile vessels. They sat very low to the water, nearly but not quite submerged. Then, you had self-propelled semi-submersibles that could dip below the water, and fully submersible vessels, which are exactly what they sound like. That was in addition to narco torpedoes, the towed version we mentioned earlier, as well as static narco containers, boxes that are bolted or placed magnetically on the underside of cargo ships. Now, we're not really going to be talking about those since they're fairly self-explanatory, but they at least deserved a quick mention here. In order to describe what a narco sub actually looks like inside and out, we've got to make some generalizations. After all, no two boats are exactly alike, especially when they're being built with no factories and few standardized parts to work with. But in most cases, a narco sub will have a hull made of fiberglass or steel, fiberglass for a lighter, harder to detect design, whereas steel is generally intended for durability or to carry heavier cargo loads. In terms of length, a narco sub can be anywhere between 12 and 20 meters on average, with the largest ever found being close to 30 meters. In most cases, they're powered by diesel engines, with significant portions of the interior dedicated to a fuel compartment. They can be human or remote operated, generally with a capacity of between 3 and 12 tons of cargo, a high percentage of which would be its fuel load. In terms of range, it really depends on the sub. As we'll discuss shortly, some designs are capable of transatlantic crossings, while others might only hold a small fuel load and be used for transporting large shipments over short distances. But as time has gone on, the subs have generally gotten faster. An 18-meter sub might be able to hit 18 kilometers per hour or 11 miles per hour, not enough to outrun a surface ship, but enough to make sure they aren't hanging around anywhere for too long and just begging to be stumbled upon. Often they'll be camouflaged with paint, riding between half a meter and 1.5 meters above the water, but almost no weight to speak of. Inside the facilities are almost always extremely cramped, with a crew compartment barely bigger than the smallest Manhattan studio apartments, shared between several crew members for weeks at a time. Toilets are a rare luxury on board, as are lights and luxury items like microwaves, which probably aren't going to be found in all but the swankiest of narco subs. In addition to the fuel compartment, any area of the boat that isn't explicitly necessary to keep its crew alive is going to be devoted to storing drugs. After all, everything on board a narco sub is done in service of the product. Comfort, or even survivability, is just a bit of an afterthought. While the vessels are out on the high seas, many suspect that they receive logistical support from innocuous-looking surface vessels. They could be refueling them in order to make longer journeys, resupplying food to keep everyone fed, and also giving them intelligence so that the submarines can avoid coastal and open ocean patrols. On occasion, more advanced submarines have popped up, crafts that are dozens of meters long with potential to dive up to 100 meters or more below the water, and with a functional range of thousands of kilometers. But just as hard as constructing a submarine like this is, being able to build them away from the grasp of law enforcement is just as challenging. In Colombia, for example, early narco subs would be built in the jungles using teams of 15 to 20 laborers, who would be compelled to stay on the premises until the submarine was done in order to avoid its location being betrayed to local authorities. Relying on generators for electricity, these teams would cobble together their submarines using hand tools, without any of the elaborately machined parts that would have made them into, well, anything other than a death trap. Fittingly, these homebrew submarines were nicknamed steel eggs in Colombia for their tendency to disappear at sea. But the logistical management requirement for these sorts of operations deserves its own consideration. Not only does heavy material and expert personnel have to be transported to these remote locations, but they've got to get everything there without leaving a trail, and run a camp for the length of time that it takes to build one. Some estimates put the time needed for construction at upward of a year. One account of what it was like in one of the earlier narco subs came courtesy of a New York Times expose published in 2009. After interviews with a Colombian fisherman who had agreed to complete a trip in a narco sub with $3,000 in pay. Escorted by armed men in the Colombian jungle, the fisherman was put into a cramped 3-section submarine where he and 3 others lived off dry noodles and bottled water in a 12 by 6 ton hull. The submarine navigated with GPS and steered with a splintered wooden wheel from a sailboat. It was carrying some 7 tons of cocaine, worth almost $200 million. The sub, moving at barely 7 miles an hour, checked in twice daily with a home base to get navigation coordinates. Although this particular trip was unsuccessful due to the sub losing contact and being set adrift, the fisherman explained that the submarine would be met by go-fast boats off the coast of its destination. The craft would be then offloaded and sunk, joining hundreds of others scuttled across the seafloor. Of course, not all narco subs are created equal. On one hand, there have been some truly impressive feats of homemade engineering that cartels and shipbuilders have pulled off around the world. On the other hand, there have been some more dubious achievements, massive interdictions by law enforcement, or exceptionally awful conditions on board. Now, it's important to give the same disclaimer that we gave about intelligence organizations. As a rule, we can assume that we typically won't hear about anything to do with narco subs unless something doesn't go planned for their operators. But even still, the efforts of global law enforcement have ensured that we've got some fascinating narco sub stories to talk about. A first big example cropped up in 2015 when the Coast Guard discovered a 40-foot-long submarine in international waters out in the eastern Pacific Ocean. An estimated 16,000 pounds or 8 tons of cocaine were on board, with a rough value of over nearly $200 million. But only about 3/4 of that could be removed by the Coast Guard, since some of it needed to stay in the sub in order to simply maintain its balance before the submarine sank on its way back to port. It was confirmed to have been the largest narco sub interdiction in Coast Guard history. In 2019, a crew of 3 unfortunate narco sub mariners held the dubious honor of pulling off an unprecedented feat, completing the first known transatlantic crossing in a narco sub. In a journey of 27 days and nights in a 20-meter, 65-foot fiberglass submarine, the crew suffered a hot, cramped, and highly unpleasant journey from South America to a location just off the coast of Galicia. Living off energy bars and probably the most unpleasant choice for an already small, smelly space, sardines. The crew endured brutal conditions. And speaking of the smell, the crew was consigned to doing their business in plastic bags. But nonetheless, they were able to make the journey of thousands of miles, hauling 3 tons of cocaine worth $150 million. It's important to clarify that this probably wasn't the first crew to make the trip, or even the 10th. Perhaps not even the 100th. But due to engine troubles, they were the first to be caught, thus confirming that these sorts of journeys are possible. For what it's worth, many experts speculate that there may well be narco sub graveyards off the Canary Islands, a valuable waypoint where the subs can be unloaded and sunk. But these rumors are still unconfirmed. Then, in 2020, Colombia picked up something odd. An electric-powered narco sub discovered at an artisan boatyard near Colombia's Rupi River. Unlike most narco subs, this one was particularly sophisticated, run with twin electric motors and twin propellers. The sub was different. Unlike other narco subs, it featured bunks for the crew, as well as dive planes to help it control its own depth. Its carrying capacity was all of 6 metric tons of product, and unlike the vast majority of narco subs, this one could fully submerge. The craft was fitted with a towing ring, in keeping with the fact that its electric batteries would only have been able to take it a few dozen miles unaided, suggesting that this craft and others like it may still be towed behind slow surface vessels before being sent inland on their own. A similar electric sub had been found in the same area in 2017, suggesting either a common master builder or a wider trend of electric towed subs that are basically unknown to global law enforcement. Very recently in the Narco Sub saga, a 2023 raid in the, apologies for butchering this, Caca and Nariño departments, basically provinces in Colombia, led to the discovery of entire secret shipyards in the jungle. Operating out of the city of Buenaventura, the group behind the shipyards apparently wasn't tied to a specific cartel, but was instead made up of freelance builders marketing their services to various criminal organizations. Although it's speculative, the implications of this are twofold. Not only is the illicit narco sub-industry developing to the point where large numbers of submarines are being bought and sold by expert builders, but building expertise is so valuable that these groups are able to operate semi-independently. One such builder, Oscar Marino Ricardo, was arrested a year prior in 2022 after 2 decades of narco sub-design and construction. But even Ricardo, the so-called king of the submersibles, appeared to leave a void that was quickly filled by other professionals. And just shortly after, in May 2023, the Colombian Navy intercepted the largest single narco sub ever recorded. At a length of 100 feet and a width of 10 feet, the sub was carrying 3 tons of cocaine en route to Central America before its crew of 3 were interdicted. In its grand history, this sub brought the Colombian Navy's total captures to 228, with 4 thus far in 2023. 2 weeks later, Colombia would get another. Its crew was midway through trying to sink the 5,000 pounds of cocaine that were on board. The sub was 55 feet long, crewed by 3 men, who are facing 14 years in prison. And in all this talk about narco subs, we've got to circle back once more to that key point we mentioned on the outset. You just don't know what else is down there. According to the U.S. Coast Guard's own estimates, the service believes that it captures barely 10% of the submarine traffic that passes through American waters. And given that not all narco subs are created equal, it's entirely likely that it's the louder, slower, or less professional piloted ones that are getting caught. Even these estimates of about 10% are based on statistics where more advanced, higher capacity, fully underwater submarines are hardly ever counted. In this realm, we simply don't know what we don't know. There could be only a handful of these subs in existence around the world, or they could be operating with impunity, with elements of construction and design that we don't even know are possible. Whatever the full reality of the narco sub is, it's hidden under the sea in a place where few things are ever revealed. At least in full, I should say. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching the True Crime Never Sleeps show. As always, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, everything you give goes right back into this channel. And if you can't give financially, consider just giving us a thumbs up if you like our videos. Hit the subscribe button and bell notification button so you're notified of future videos. And of course, share this video with friends if you like it. So again, thank you so much for watching and tuning in each and every week. And as always, thank you so much for watching and listening. Let's dive right in. I think it's safe to say that most people have secrets, little things they've done that they don't intend to share with anyone else. Whether it's a small thing about themselves or even a bigger thing. Most people have something they probably plan to take to the grave. But sometimes those secrets do not get buried along with us, especially when death culminates in a murder investigation. That's when our secrets matter the most. What wasn't someone telling their friends or family? Who were they talking to that no one ever knew about? And could that have led to their premature death? No matter how big or small, a victim's secrets are often the biggest clue in a murder investigation. At least, that's what TV leads us to believe. But sometimes secrets are nothing more than a scandalous distraction, one that forces us to ignore reality, because secrets aren't always deadly. Oftentimes, the answer to murder lies in the mundane. So let's dial back the clock to the year 2007 as we travel back to St. Charles, Missouri. Just west of St. Louis, St. Charles is the suburban little town mostly filled with commuters. The sort of place where people have spent generations, where everyone knows everyone, is generally considered a peaceful, safe little community. It also happens to be where 48-year-old Bob Eidman and his wife Diane call home. Now everyone who knows Bob says that he is a teddy bear of a guy,
only about 5'6", but he has a huge personality. Incredibly bubbly and lovable, he's always cracking jokes. In fact, it seems like Bob was a bit of a class clown growing up, too. When he wasn't pulling off pranks, he was testing the boundaries of authority. Every summer, he was having to make up classwork in summer school. But Bob was also easily distracted by girls growing up. And shortly after graduating from high school was when Bob met the woman that he would spend the rest of his life with. And that was Diane Bowling. Now, not only was Diane a bit taller than Bob, she matched his sharp-witted personality too. She could go toe-to-toe with Bob and put him in his place. She could put him in his place, and that was something Bob loved about Diane. So, come to the year 2007, they've been married for 20 years. Though they never had any children together, they seem to have built a nice life for themselves. Diane managed the kitchen at a local hospital while Bob ran his own business. He was an insurance agent with his own office in a strip mall along a busy route that ran into St. Louis. But lately, Bob's business in 2007 had fallen on hard times. He wasn't getting as many clients as he used to, which was starting to stress him out a little bit. By June of 2007, he basically thought he was going to stay afloat for a few more months before he'd have to close up shop entirely. But on the 8th of that month in June, Bob faced the unthinkable. It was a beautiful, sunny Friday, about 80 degrees. When Bob opened up his shop, took a seat at his desk around 11 a.m., a mail carrier stopped by his office on her usual route, and that's when she saw the unthinkable. She dropped everything and began running up the street, calling for help. She flagged down a police officer who happened to be passing by and told them that the man who ran the insurance company over there was lying on the floor, motionless. He had blood covering his face. So when more officers are called to the scene, they find Bob has been shot. There are 3 bullet wounds on his body. One on his chin, one on his neck, and the fatal shot being the one through his eye. Now all of them appeared to have been fired at close range, and all from the same gun, though there weren't any other signs of a struggle from what police could tell. However, they realized at the crime scene, Bob's wallet is missing, and sources who know him say he always kept his wallet in his back pocket. So as they are sweeping the crime scene for clues, they gather any ammunition casings and fingerprints they can find, and they actually do something pretty smart. They cut out the fabric around Bob's back pocket, where he usually kept his wallet, and they did this in order to search it for touch DNA. Because if someone took the wallet out of his back pocket, maybe they left something behind. Now, it doesn't take long for local reporters to catch a wind of this crime. Homicides only happen about once a year in St. Charles, so this is a pretty big local story. But Diane, Bob's wife, hears that something has happened down at Bob's office, so she rushes to the scene. When she gets there, she tells police, "I've been trying to reach Bob all day. He never answered his phone. Is everything all right?" Though by this point, Diane must know nothing is all right, and it's there, at the scene of the crime. The police break the news to Diane. "No, Bob has been murdered. Your husband has been murdered." Now, as I mentioned, murder isn't something the local police deal with a whole lot here in St. Charles, so they call in to help the Major Case Squad. And the Major Case Squad has a pretty great track record. They claim that 80% of their cases get solved, and one of the first things that police start to investigate is what could have motivated someone to show up and shoot Bob in his office in broad daylight. Well, they think the answer to that might actually lie in Bob's business itself. Remember, Bob was an insurance salesman, but his clientele was sort of on the fringe. Bob dealt with the kind of people who were high-risk drivers, people with bad credit, and challenging histories. Basically, people who would have a hard time getting insurance through traditional methods. And since a lot of people would try and pay with bad checks that would bounce, Bob was only really accepting cash at this time, which meant Bob's office had a lot of cash in it at any given moment. And apparently, Bob didn't have a lot of that money locked up in a safe either. He just kept it in a locked drawer in his desk. Now, whether or not any clients of his knew that, witnesses are unsure. But when police go to that desk drawer, they find there's only $200 inside. That's a heck of a lot less than what Bob was supposed to be keeping in there. So between that and his missing wallet, police are thinking, is this a robbery? But why wouldn't they take all the cash then? Why leave $200? Plus, there doesn't seem to have been any forced entry into the place. None of the typical signs you might expect if someone was trying to break in and rob this place. So police have to consider another possibility. After speaking with Bob's family and friends, They learn pretty quickly about the difficult times that Bob has fallen on, that he was just 3 months away from basically shutting his business down. So they also wonder, what if Bob had taken a hit out on his own life? Could that have been something he was capable of, or even considered? But that same day, police do get a break in the case, one that at least gives them some hint as to who shot Bob. So investigators have been going around trying to collect security footage from the area at the time of the crime, and they find one taken from a Mexican grocery store really close to Bob's office. It has a pretty good view of the front door of Bob's insurance company. It even captured the mail carrier running away from the scene that day. But what it also got was a white Ford Focus driving past Bob's business twice that morning. Once at 10:50 and then again at 10:54. Only that second time, it was much slower. It honestly looked like the Ford Focus was looking for something. That's just 6 minutes before Bob was found dead. Now the police are feeling pretty confident this car either saw something or was involved somehow. So they need to find out who owns it. Problem is, there's about 5,000 white Ford Focuses on the road in Missouri at this time. So it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. But what seems like that same day, they seem to catch a really lucky break, because they discover not too far from Bob's business, a white car that has been crashed and abandoned off the side of a nearby road. And inside of this white car is Bob Eidman's business card. Now you have to imagine what that's like for police. Okay, so they're doing this, they find the security footage, they're like, oh, this is our answer. Then they see the white car, they're like, shoot, we're kind of back to square one. How are we going to find this? And then they get a call that a white car has crashed and that Bob's card is inside. Now the police locate the owner of this vehicle. It's a man named Travis Ensley. When he's called in for questioning, he's actually shocked to learn he's not just there because he abandoned his crashed vehicle and falsely reported it stolen. He's there because he is a person of interest in a murder investigation. And even worse, when they pull Travis in, he has blood on his shirt. Travis is like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is all a huge misunderstanding. And he says he had been needing new insurance on his car, and Bob's business card in his vehicle. So he says he went to Bob, he liked the guy, even gave him a good rate. But the night before Travis was questioned, he went out, had a few drinks, crashed his newly insured car, and drunkenly, Travis stumbled back home that night with a broken nose, and then woke up the next morning to notice his car wasn't there. He'd forgotten that he crashed it the night before. He called his new insurance and reported it stolen, before finally remembering, oh, actually, I think I left it on an embankment not far from my apartment. So police think this is a bit far-fetched, but the blood on Travis's shirt does turn out to be his own, and Travis's alibi holds up as well. He wasn't at the scene of Bob's crime when it happened, which means Travis might have looked like the ideal suspect. Police are kind of back to square one. And before we continue our story, we'd like to, again, thank our sponsor for NordVPN for sponsoring this episode. Let's be real, we're online all the time. Whether you're streaming, banking, or doom scrolling at 2 a.m., your data is out there. And these days, hackers, advertisers, and even your internet provider want a piece of that pie. And that's when NordVPN steps in. NordVPN is one of the fastest and most reliable VPNs in the world. With just one click, you can protect your devices with military-grade encryption. Think of it as putting your online activity in an armored tank that no one's getting in. Worried about public Wi-Fi at coffee shops or airports? Don't be. NordVPN shields you from sketchy networks and keeps your personal info, like passwords and credit cards, safe from prying eyes. Want to stream shows that aren't available in your country? You're going to love this. NordVPN lets you access content from over 60 countries. So you can binge international Netflix, Hulu, or BBC iPlayer with zero buffering. Plus, with threat protection, NordVPN now blocks ads, trackers, and malware before they even hit your browser. It's like antivirus and privacy armor all rolled into one. Right now, NordVPN is offering an exclusive deal just for our subscribers. Use the link in the description today and get a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 bonus months free. That's 28 months of digital peace of mind. And there's zero risk thanks to Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Try it out, and if it's not for you, no problem. Protect your connection, explore the internet without limits. Just use the link in the description and take control of your online life today. And now, let's get back to our story. Though, as always, there's one person that can't be ignored in a murder investigation, And that is Diane. So the spouse, and while I don't have any initial reason to believe Diane was involved, they ask her a few questions to rule her out anyway. Though the more they start talking to Diane, the more they wonder, okay, is she actually involved? Police's suspicion kind of start from the moment Diane actually showed up at the crime scene that day, because some say that Diane, despite hearing the news that her husband's just been murdered, didn't really seem too surprised or emotional in the moment. But that's not the only thread they're following when it comes to Diane. She too tells police they were facing some financial issues. So it's not like Bob was keeping this a secret from Diane. Yep, there wasn't a lot of cash coming in. The business was floundering, and they were having a hard time paying the bills. And there's a couple of red flags that go off for detectives at this point. One of them being the fact that Diane seems to have a bad memory. Only when it comes to certain things like her social security number and whether or not Bob has any life insurance policies. What she seemingly forgets to tell police is Bob did have his own, and Diane was about to receive more than $300,000 after Bob's death. That's a lot of money considering the situation they're in as well. Though it's not until police start checking with insurance companies that they actually realize this. Excuse me. Diane never tells them herself, so of course, because she keeps this from them, it makes her look suspicious. And that's not the worst of it. See, Diane has some family secrets as well, one that doesn't exactly look great for her when she mentions them to detectives. On the day of Bob's death, Diane speaks with a female detective and sort of opens up to her, and she says, "Look, don't take this as a confession, but this same thing happened to my dad." And here's what she means. When Diane was 26 years old, so about 2 decades prior to this, her father was working as a St. Louis police officer, but on the morning of April 6, 1984, at around 2:30 a.m., her mother dials 911, claims someone broke into the house, stole his gun, and shot him to death. Now, when police get to the house, they find Diane's mother, Lenore. She has no tears, her hair is fully done, and when police question her, she's casually smoking a cigarette. She has no emotion. Sound a little familiar? Well, Lenore tells the police that there's been a man following them lately, and he's been leaving notes at the house, including one on the night Diane's father died, that said, "This is for what you did to me." But as police really get into their investigation, they learn that there was no forced entry into the home. The door to the garage, where Lenore said the man broke in, was dead-bolted shut, among many other clues. And eventually, it was Lenore, Diane's mother, who was charged with murdering her husband, Diane's father. So you can kind of see why Diane mentions this to police, because it would be suspicious if she didn't say, "Hey, my mom was arrested and charged for shooting my dad in the face, and now my husband has been shot in the face." And also maybe she's just taken after her mom. So the similarities are a little glaring, especially when they hear that Bob was scared to death of Lenore. That's his mother-in-law, particularly because she was actually living in their home as she awaited trial. And rightfully so. I mean, he had an accused murderer sleeping under the same roof as him. So Bob was always locking their bedroom door. He was afraid to be alone in the house with his mother-in-law. But in a pretty shocking turn of events, Lenore was actually found not guilty by a jury, and she was acquitted for that crime. I'm not sure how this entire thing affected Bob and Diane's marriage, but the verdict probably didn't put him at ease. And it unfortunately wasn't giving police any confidence in Diane either. So the next time the police speak with Diane, they ask her, "Hey, why don't you just take a polygraph test so we can clear your name?" So Diane agrees, and she tells police she has absolutely nothing to hide. She had nothing to do with her husband's murder, and her results come back inconclusive. She doesn't fail, but they can't get a read on her. So the next step is for police to get a closer look at Bob's personal life, and Diane agrees to let them take his computer for analysis. And what they find there honestly changes the course of the investigation. So one of the first things they find on Bob's computer is that he's been visiting homosexual websites, and not just porn. It's more like hookup sites. Think Grindr before Grindr. So that leads detectives to subpoena Bob's phone records, because now they're wondering, is this a secret love affair that went sideways? someone looking to blackmail or even extort Bob. And when they look into his call history, they find that Bob has been chatting with one person pretty consistently for a while. Someone who lives out of town, about 3 hours away. It's a man named Drew Smith. Here's the thing though, Drew and Bob weren't just having some long-distance emotional affair. Apparently they'd meet up in motels closer to Drew's hometown whenever Bob could get away. So police think, we gotta talk to Drew obviously because he's basically Bob's lover. And honestly, what they uncover is pretty heartbreaking, because not only did Bob feel like he was living this double life, it turns out, according to Drew, he and Bob really were in love. They spoke to each other several times a day, and I guess Bob was telling himself he wanted to eventually just come out to his wife and then have a relationship with Drew. Drew even had a tattoo for Bob on his arm. Meanwhile, Bob had been keeping little souvenirs from their meetups and dates together. Now, Drew has an alibi for where he was during the time of Bob's death, and he passes a polygraph, so he's kind of ruled out as the suspect pretty quickly. But police discover something else. The secret life that Bob was living, well, it wasn't so secret after all. Bob's wife had stumbled across some of the emails Bob had been sending to Drew. So she knew, basically. She knew about this love affair, and when she confronted Bob about it, he apparently denied it all. But Diane was like, no, this is real. So now the focus returns back to Diane. Could she have been angry about this relationship? She maybe hired someone to, I don't know, but I don't see that happening. Could be wrong. The problem is, though, there's only circumstantial evidence when it comes to Diane. Nothing concrete whatsoever connecting her physically to the crime. So Bob's case starts to run cold, until about 2 years later when St. Charles police get a call from a DNA investigative team. So remember how the police cut out Bob's pocket where his wallet usually was? The thinking was that if someone yanked his wallet from his pocket, there would be touch DNA. Well, in 2009, investigators learned that the DNA they pulled from that pocket finally has a match. And it's someone the police would have never guessed. The man's name is Paul White. And he was a customer at Bob's insurance agency. There were even files on Bob's desk when he died with Paul's name on them. So, it's a current client. They also discovered that a month or so after the murder, Paul White was a passenger in a car that was stopped for a traffic violation. It was an expired registration. The driver's name was Cleo Hines. And Cleo Hines drove a light-colored Ford Focus, just like the one that was seen driving past Bob's office in the minutes before and after the murder. Now, Paul is pretty easy to find because he's in prison when his name finally pops up in this case. It's for a completely unrelated charge, though, for forgery, actually. But that's not the only thing on Paul White's rap sheet. I mean, this guy's been charged with a bunch of different things over the years, mostly forgery and theft. I don't think murder was on the list yet. However, when police show up to the prison to question Paul, he completely denies having anything to do with Bob's murder. Actually says it was physically impossible for his DNA to be on that pair of pants. So with Paul not willing to show any of his cards, detectives realized they need to pivot. And now they are looking at the man who was driving the car during that traffic violation, the owner of the white Ford Focus, Cleo. What they learned is Cleo was living with Paul before his arrest. So they think, alright, we're starting to get somewhere. They have this relationship, like a personal relationship at least. Maybe we should bring in Cleo for questioning. Maybe he'll flip on Paul. I mean, maybe he was the getaway driver. And almost the second he sits his butt down in the hot seat, he cracks like an egg. He's like, yeah, I was involved in Bob's murder. But I was just the getaway driver, I swear. Excuse me. In fact, he doubles down saying, quote, no, Paul actually forced me to do this. He literally held me at gunpoint and made me drive him there and back. Cleo claims that the night before Paul had lost over $1,200 at a casino and was desperate to make up for it, he told Cleo he knew a guy that kept a bunch of cash at his business on site, and they were going to go rob him. This was literally a day of decision. He said Paul had actually woken him up that morning with a pistol to his head, forcing him to get up and do it. When Cleo was asked what kind of gun Paul was wielding that day, Cleo said it was a 9mm Glock. This is the same exact kind of gun that was used to kill Bob. So police now know that this is likely the truth, or at least Paul and Cleo are in fact involved in Bob's murder. Maybe we don't know the specifics, was he actually forced? But they believe now that these are the two guys. But the entire time, Cleo was insisting, I never got out of the car. All I did was drive Paul to the scene, got out, got the cash, got back in, and I drove away. So now police realize we've got to go back to Paul and let him know Cleo's turned on him. And this time, not knowing that his buddy is speaking out against him, Paul says, okay, I'm going to confess. I did kill Bob that day, but I didn't do it alone. Paul says that on the morning of the crime, both he and Cleo lost money at the casino. They went around town looking for people to rob and at one point considered targeting people coming out of Walmart. But when they realized there were too many cameras, Paul came up with another idea. They should just go after his insurance agent, Bob. Paul knew Bob kept a bunch of cash on site because his wife had seen it when she went to sign for her insurance policy about a month or two earlier. And then Paul says the two of them drove to Bob's office together. They both got out of the car. They both put on masks and went into Bob's office. When they demanded he give them the cash, Bob gave them the $300 that he had on hand. But when they demanded more, and Bob said he didn't have it, they ripped his wallet out of his pants and, in a spur-of-the-moment decision, decided to shoot Bob several times and left. Now I will say Paul changes his story a lot during his confessions, so this is the best version I kind of wrapped up for you. But I will add this. Neither Paul nor Cleo ever mentioned Diane. They were both asked individually if they had ever heard of Diane, and they were like, no, not really. I mean, we know that's his wife. Which means Diane, who's probably the main person of interest in this case, simply because of her family's history, what happened between her dad and mom, her not-so-good memory, her husband's affair. What a coincidence, right? Well, she's cleared, all because of a little touch DNA on a pair of pants. Like literally, because they cut out the pocket, they figured out who it was. This is the issue with crime scenes. You would hope that they could go around to every square footage of a building and test everywhere, but that's not. You have to test the most common places, a place someone would touch or grab. So it was so smart for them to test that pocket. Now Paul White and Cleo Hines are both charged with first-degree murder and first-degree robbery. Paul pleads not guilty to the charges. His trial only lasts 3 days. The jury's deliberations are quick, and just 2.5 hours later, they come back with a verdict of guilty on all counts. He's later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, Cleo, on the other hand, chose to enter an Alford plea. Basically, he's not officially saying he did it, but he has evidence against him and he doesn't want to go to trial, so he'll take an Alford plea. So Cleo gets a lesser conviction than Paul does because of this. He gets second-degree murder with first-degree robbery, sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Now, unfortunately, because of the circumstances surrounding Bob's death, there is something that is so sad and devastating. On top of someone being a victim of murder, everything about their life gets put on blast. So these secrets that Bob had, he doesn't get to take it to the grave with him. And that's something I find difficult to swallow. That sometimes we dig into people's personal lives in order to find out who killed them. However, in Bob's case, none of that even needed to be exposed to learn what really happened that day. I mean, him having this affair, having a man that was in love with him, was a huge part of this case. It was the number one reason Diane was a suspect. Just to find out that it had nothing to do with that, which is hard because I do get the other side of it, that statistically it usually is a spouse. So to them, they're like, we have to dig. However, at the end of the day, Paul and Cleo stole a lot more from Bob than just $300 and his life. They stole Bob's privacy. That's something Bob and his family will never get back. And with that, that is the murder case of Bob Eigman. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comment section below. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS or just scan the QR code right there. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you next time.